Leviticus 11 to 15 today, which is a section particularly dwelling upon what's clean and what's unclean. And we're finally going to find out the big question of, is it okay to eat a bacon sandwich? It's quite a big section, and it goes into details on what's clean in terms of what you can eat, what's clean in terms of moulds and things, and what's clean in terms of bodily functions, that sort of thing, uplifting stuff. In terms of animals, the guideline is it's got to have a divided hoof and chew the cud, then you can eat it. And if it doesn't do any of that, then you can't eat it. So unfortunately, technically speaking, you can't have a bacon sandwich. That's some pretty terrible news, I think. On the flip side, I know a lot of Christians who've eaten a lot of bacon sandwiches, so presumably something later comes along and says, no, it's fine, you can eat a bacon sandwich, thankfully, so hopefully we'll get onto that bit fairly soon. Some of the random highlights, it's camels, you can't eat a camel. I'm not sure whoever looked at a camel thought, yummy. Eagles are unclean, apparently. You think magnificent things soaring in the air. Nope, unclean, you can't eat one of those. I mean, you would want to eat an eagle, but that's modern sensibilities, I think. Bats, you can't eat bats. Not looking at anyone in particular. Markets in certain countries that may not have started COVID. And insects are bad, unclean. You can't eat them unless they have knees. Yeah. Otherwise, there are sort of categories of uncleanliness. So if you eat one of these animals that's bad, you're unclean. If you touch a carcass of an animal that's unclean, then you're unclean. Only until the evening. It doesn't specify what time particularly. I guess that's sunset or something. There's talk about moulds and things. If you find mould on fabrics and all the rest of it, what you have to do there. I've tried to approach this in terms of, okay, on what basis would this make any sense? And I guess to some of it, there is a sort of a hygiene angle in the sense that bodily discharges make you unclean. And if you think of an example of a runny nose, you think if someone's got a runny nose, that's a bodily discharge. That's a horrible word, isn't it? They have to be removed from society until they're clean again. That makes a lot of sense, obviously. I mean, if someone comes into my office and they've got a runny nose, it's like, get out! I don't want your smelly disease, and you can see how that will work. But there's a lot of this that just doesn't seem to have that hygienic quarantine sort of thing, and there are references to being ceremonially unclean, which suggests it's not actually unclean, you just ceremonially so. There is a fairly sensible bit on skin conditions, which does seem to make sense in a hygienic sort of sense. Potentially there were contagious sort of things, so if there is a contagious one, you have to remove yourself, and that sort of makes sense. It's a little harsh, and you have to announce that you're unclean, you have to keep your hair unkempt, and then you have to rip your clothes to make it very clear that you're some sort of dirty leper. But you can at least see some sort of sense in that, I suppose. Once again, we have a lot of repetition. It's very long-winded, very boring. If you're reading along to these chapters, you might want to skim read 11 to 15. It's pretty dull and very specific. The big problem arises, I think, there seems to be a difference in the treatment of men and women. So it's said that when a woman gives birth to a boy, she's then unclean for 7 days, but can't touch anything sacred for 33 days. And you think, all right, fine, sort of. But if she gives birth to a girl, then she's unclean for twice as long and can't touch anything sacred for twice as long, 66 days. I have no medical knowledge or anything, but as far as I'm aware, there's no biological difference for a mother in giving birth to a boy or a girl, as in her condition afterwards would be identical, I think. So the fact that the treatment for giving birth to a girl is different to the treatment for giving birth to a boy, and dramatically and massively inconveniently so, I would have to say. It's difficult not to see that as some sort of oppression of women. I'm not a feminist or anything like that, but I'm all for fairness. I think fairness doesn't always necessarily mean treating everyone the same, but I don't see why it has to mean that if you give birth to a girl, it's seemingly twice as bad as giving birth to a boy. Very, very, very weird. And I think that's kind of problematic for the Bible as well, because if it was written by people, then you could understand it would reflect the views of the time, which were clearly that women were very much second-class citizens. But this would seem to suggest that this has come from God. So God is It blatantly states that it's come from God. So that would suggest that God is endorsing treatment of women in a different way to men for no apparent reason, and disadvantageously so. And I just wonder if does that hint that this is more likely to be written by a bloke. I don't know. I guess of that time, if God had suddenly come out and said women get the vote and all the rest of it, then there might have been sort of uproar. But God's telling people to do stuff and then killing them if they don't. It would seem reasonable to think that had he told people that something was going to be the way it was, it would just be that way, or you're going to get set fire to, or whatever. So I don't know what to do with that. We'll have to just see if that is a situation that improves over time. But certainly in the context of this little bit, it's not very nice. At one point, God's talking about mould in houses and what you have to do in terms of cleanliness of moulds. But there's a seemingly almost innocuous sentence where he says, when you come to the land of Canaan, where I'm going to take you and I'm going to give you this land, if I have put mould in a house there, then you've got to do all this stuff. Great, fine. But God says he's put the mould there. Some of the measures you have to take, you have to abandon the house for 7 days. Where do you go? You've got to scrape the walls. If it doesn't get better 7 days later, then you've got to take the bricks out and go and get rid of them outside the town, and then go and put new bricks in. There's a lot of trouble. And God's saying that he has put the mould there. And it's just like a little bit like just tripping someone up for fun almost. And I don't know. It does suggest that there is more purpose behind all this, I guess. Or maybe all this massive faff behind all the rituals and the rest of it is clearly getting at something that perhaps doesn't make much sense in modern day and age. Some of the rituals, for once you've finished being unclean and you've got to get clean, you've got to go do your sacrifices to sort of atone to some extent. But one of them, you've got to sacrifice some sort of bird. You've got to get a drop of blood and put one drop on your big toe, one on your thumb and one on your earlobe. So random. I mean, it's so weird you almost couldn't make it up. It's just, I don't know, let's do this. And very, very odd. But there's clearly some reason for it, because otherwise it's just absolutely nuts. There's also a bit where it seems to suggest that where there's bodily discharges, you then have to make a sacrifice for atonement. As in having a runny nose or women having their period, they then got to go and say sorry for that in some respect. It's just like, that's bizarre. I just don't really know what to do with it. I guess it's just so alien to our modern way of doing things that it's just almost impossible to wrap your head around it. But yeah, that's Leviticus 11 to 15. Again, very, very dull. Interesting in the sense that it's a little bit more of an insight into what people should and shouldn't be doing, a little bit more of expansion post Ten Commandments. But a lot of it some of it makes sense, but a lot of it really doesn't. Some of it begs serious questions about fairness and why on earth God would treat some things the way he does in terms of cleanliness and uncleanliness. Very, very strange. Up next, there's some more rules in terms of what you can and can't do and how you can atone for things. And I think there is actually a bit coming up, I think I saw, in terms of reward for good behaviour. So that would be good. And there's some stuff on who you can and can't sleep with. It's a very weird list. That's some comedy goldmine there, I suspect. We are at least now over halfway through Leviticus, so hopefully we can get this all wrapped up, learn a few more bits, then move on to something a bit more interesting.